it's me again. I am doing a lecture for you on what's going to be going on this week, which is specifically an evaluating sources exercise, since for paper number 3, you need to make sure that the sources for your paper are as airtight as you can get them and as reliable as you can get them. And I'll also be covering a few other things after the PowerPoint lecture at the end. Now, the PowerPoint lecture that I'm about to go over is going to be in the multimedia folder of course documents. So if you want to look at it later, I would definitely suggest you do that, just to make sure that you know what you're looking for when you're evaluating sources in your research. As I said, this lecture is going to be in the multimedia folder of course documents. Now, you may be asking the question, what sources can you always trust? Well, the answer is none. That's the problem. All sources need to be evaluated these days, even sources that were once considered neutral and trustworthy, such as .gov sites. .gov are government sites, specifically the US government, and some of those sites are no longer reliable because various bits of information that were considered factual have been taken down by certain people. Newspaper websites, for instance, were once considered neutral and trustworthy, but they also have had issues in the last several years. Depending on the topic, even reliable sources might sensationalize it or report it with a slight or even a strong ideological slant. The chart below from Adfonts Media maps media bias. If you look on this chart, and by the way, I'll show you a way to get to a more interactive version of this chart if you can't see it. I know it's very small. Essentially tells you where on the spectrum of bias, political bias rather, these different media sources are. AP, which is Associated Press, is straight down the middle. You know that if it comes from Associated Press, it is completely unbiased, or at least it should be unbiased, regardless of what anybody says. And then as you look off to the sides, you find that the biases start on the left side with NPR and with the BBC, and over here is CNN, MSNBC, all the way over. And on this side, we have Forbes and Fortune on the right-hand side. Fox News is over here. And InfoWars is all the way over here. Now on this next slide, there is a link for the interactive media bias chart, and I want to show you exactly how this works. This is what the media chart looks like when you go into it. You don't have to do any logins or anything like that. All you have to do is click on the names of the news sources that are listed alphabetically at the bottom of the chart, and it will show you how they're rated. And if you go all the way down here, you see this really long list of sources. In fact, it's not a fully extensive list of sources. There are other sources out there, obviously, but let's just see if we can find one and see where on the list it goes. All right, let's try the Washington Post. If we click on Washington Post and scroll up, then we're going to see that this chart is filled with dots. Each one of those dots represents a story that has been reported by the Washington Post. Now you see that several of them hit that middle line, that line of neutral or balanced bias, which is what a good newspaper should do. And there are a few that actually skew to the right. There are a few that skew to the left. There's at least one or two that go hyper-partisan, but these might be one-offs. If you see a lot of dotting around here, then you know that their bias is mostly neutral, but skewing to the left somewhat. And if you click on each of them, you're going to see what sort of story it's going to be. Over here, it's going to be original fact reporting. This is going to be fact reporting, complex analyses, analysis pieces, and opinion pieces. And you notice that it's the opinion pieces that are going to skew to the left and to the right most in a publication like this, because of course, an opinion piece does, by its very definition, have bias. If we were going to go down and look at another source, let's say our old friends at InfoWars, and see what that looks like. Aha. That's a very different picture, isn't it? There's nothing neutral, nothing balanced at all on their site. It all skews to the right. They do not meet the standard for fact reporting. And whatever complex analysis they have, the only one that they have still skews to the right. Most of their analysis is in this area. Their opinion pieces are definitely in this area. In fact, some of their pieces go all the way over here to the most extreme right. And there you see this crash of dots. And those dots represent propaganda, or stories that contain misleading information, selective or incomplete stories, or unfair persuasion, and stories that contain inaccurate or fabricated information. So if you're trying to check one of the major news sources out there, I would definitely look at this chart as a possible way of making sure that it is the sort of source you want to use. And be aware that you can use a biased source so long as you're aware of the bias and you report that bias in your paper somehow. There's also another website called Media Bias Fact Check, which is particularly up to date for checking stories' validity. In fact, let's go ahead and look at this one. Media Bias Fact Check is described as the most comprehensive media bias resource, and it certainly works very well that way. What you need to do with this one, though, is you need to do an actual search for your source. Now, let's do InfoWars here and see what they give us. In most cases, if you can't find a source on that other website, you can find it on this one. Let's see what they have to say about InfoWars. And sorry about the noise in the background noise of cars going past. Nothing I can really do about that. They describe InfoWars in general and Alex Jones specifically as conspiracy pseudoscience. And these are sources that publish unverifiable information that's not always supported by evidence. These sources may be untrustworthy for credible and verifiable information. Therefore, fact-checking and further investigation is recommended on a per-article basis when obtaining information from these sources. Overall, InfoWars Alex Jones is a crackpot tinfoil hat level conspiracy website that also strongly promotes pseudoscience. The amount of fake news and debunked conspiracy claims, as well as extreme right-wing bias, renders InfoWars a non-credible source on any level. And it gives you a detailed report of this particular source, which is fantastic. And it even gives you some of their stories and shows you exactly why these stories have rendered this as a source that is unreliable. Now, and up here you get the sliding scale that tells you exactly where on the scale it goes. Conspiracy level is at tinfoil hat, and pseudoscience level is strong. Factual reporting, very low. Okay, just so it doesn't look like I'm slamming on only conservative sources, let's take a look at something on the other side. In fact, let's not even do New Yorker, let's do Slate. And this is the report for Slate. And you see that it is, to the left, not necessarily extreme, but the saving grace for Slate is that they have a very high level of factual reporting. They do have a bias towards liberal causes through story selection and or political affiliation. They may utilize strong loaded words, wording that attempts to influence an audience by using appeal to emotion or stereotypes, publish misleading reports, or omit reporting of information that may damage liberal causes. Some sources in this category may be untrustworthy. Overall, we rate Slate moderately left bias based on story selection and editorial positions that favor the left, and high for factual reporting due to proper sourcing and a reasonable fact-check record. We're going to do one other, and that's going to be the Washington Post, which is at the moment one of the president's favorite newspapers. Heavy sarcasm here. All right, and as we see, they are not too far from the biased center line. They're more left center, and their factual reporting is very high. There is a moderate liberal bias. They publish factual information that utilizes loaded words. They are generally trustworthy but may require further investigation. Overall, we rate the Washington Post left center biased based on editorial positions that moderately favor the left, and factually high due to the use of proper sources and a reasonable fact-check record. Again, this is a very good resource to use if you're trying to figure out whether something is biased or not. Now, what types of sources can actually mislead you? Well, there was a former organization, which is unfortunately now defunct, opensource.co, that was devoted to professionally curating these sources online. And here's the breakdowns that they used. Fake news, a phrase that we're all familiar with, is entirely fabricated information, deceptive content, or grossly distorted actual news reports. And I've given an example of this as beforeitsnews.com. Another type of source that can mislead you is a satirical site, which uses humor, irony, exaggeration, ridicule, and false information to comment on current events, and The Onion is probably the biggest example of this. There are also sites with extreme bias from a particular point of view, relying on propaganda, decontextualized information, which is information that's been taken out of context so it can be used to slant the stance being stated, and opinions distorted as facts. And the website usrightleft.com is a good example of this. Conspiracy theories, such as our good friends at InfoWars, are well-known promoters of kooky conspiracy theories, such as wikileaks.org. And rumor mills are trafficking in rumors, gossip, innuendo, and unverified claims. And just so nobody thinks that I'm leaving pop culture out of this, I have included the website boundingintocomics.com because it actually is one such website that does this quite a bit. A state news source is a news source generally in a repressive state, such as North Korea or even China or Russia, that specifically operates under government sanction. In other words, the government tells the network what to say, and they cannot report anything that reflects poorly on that government. I've included the English language website for China's state-run news. The interesting thing there is every once in a while you do get honest reporting from it, but you also get a lot of propaganda, especially during this time that we're living through. And of course, junk science sources are those that promote pseudoscience, metaphysics, naturalistic fallacies, and other scientifically dubious claims. Interestingly enough, the example here is called junkscience.com, but they themselves are debunkers of actual science. In other words, they claim that scientific fact is wrong. So it's this weird kind of inception-y thing. But if you go to the site, it doesn't mean that everything on it is junk science. It means that everything reported on the website is believed by the reporters to be junk science, which is pretty ridiculous. Hate news involves sources that actively promote racism, misogyny, homophobia, and other forms of discrimination. A lot of the sources that I used to use for this are since gone, like Stormwatch. But if you briefly click on fakehatecrimes.org, what you're going to see is very interesting. This is a site that details various hate crimes that have been committed, or fake hate crimes, as they call them. Sometimes the hate crimes that they detail are actual hate crimes, and they simply believe that they don't actually happen. Other times, they may find evidence that something that was reported as a hate crime wasn't. The problem is you can't really tell them apart because of the language they use. And finally, political sources provide generally verifiable information in support of certain points of view or political orientations. That would be MSNBC on the left side and Fox News on the right. Now, all of these can engage in clickbait, which is when generally credible content uses exaggerated, misleading, or questionable headlines, social media descriptions, and/or images. If a source is credible, it is circulating news and information in a manner consistent with traditional and ethical practices in journalism. But remember that even credible sources sometimes rely on clickbait-style headlines or occasionally make mistakes. So any source can make mistakes. Any source can be wrong. No source is right 100% of the time. So what steps do you have to take to make sure that the source is good before you even get into it? One thing you need to do is make sure that you're not looking at a blog, because blogs tend to be the personal opinions of private citizens, not of experts. So be careful to watch for words like .wordpress or Blogger. Slight variations of well-known websites that attach a .co may signify that the website's a fake version, but there are reputable foreign news organizations that may have these country-specific domains. CO, for instance, is the domain marker for Colombia. You should also analyze the About Us, if there is one on the website. If they don't have one, if they don't have an About Us or a Contact Us link, it may indicate that an info source is not legitimate. It may also mean that they simply have a bad web editor, but it's definitely something to consider. If they have an About Us, make sure to Google the names under About Us or look them up on Wikipedia to find out background about them, or to see if they've been reported on, such as by Snopes.com. And by the way, Snopes.com is another website that you can use to check to see whether or not a story is valid or not. They're very good about checking to make sure that something isn't fake news. You should also check for anything online about the contributor's political affiliations. And if the site has a legal or disclaimer section, it may be a disclosure for a satirical site, such as The Onion. But be careful, because some news sources also use legal or disclaimer sections because they don't want to be sued. Another way to analyze the source is by asking these questions. Does the website mention or link to a study or a source? Then click on that link and look up that source or study. When you look at it, do you think that the original site is accurately reflecting or reporting the information that you find at that link? Are officials being cited? Can you confirm their quotes elsewhere? Some media literacy and critical scholars call this triangulation. It means that you verify details, facts, quotes, and so on with multiple sources, generally in threes. If you can find a quote in, say, 3 different sources, then it's probably legit, even if it says that it comes from an anonymous source. Now, here's the thing to remember about anonymous sources. Despite what some people may say about them, anonymous sources are not liars, and they're not purveyors of fake news. They may be someone who is close to a situation who cannot speak on the record because they're not authorized to. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're giving fake information. The most famous use of an anonymous source, for instance, was Deep Throat back during the Watergate era. And currently, of course, we've had the whistleblower in the Trump impeachment, who also was an anonymous source, but they did give legitimate information. You should also analyze the writing style. Does the website follow AP style or some other style guide? Typically, a lack of style guide indicates an overall lack of editing and fact-checking process. What I mean by AP style guide is, are they consistent in the way they refer to people? Are they consistent in their punctuation? Are they consistent in layouts? Does the site frequently use all caps in headlines or in the body text? Does the headline or body of the text use words like wow, slaughter, destroy? These are often used to create emotional responses that more traditional styles of journalism try to avoid. You also need to analyze the aesthetic style. As with the style guide, many fake and questionable news sites utilize very bad design, usually because they can't afford it. That also means that they don't have anything approaching a newsroom. And usually this means that the screens are cluttered with text and heavy-handed photoshopping and digital images. These are pretty easy to spot sometimes. If all this sounds complicated, just remember CRAP. That is the CRAP test. That's an acronym, by the way. The C stands for currency. In other words, how recent is this information? How up-to-date is it? Can you locate a date when the page or pages were written or created or updated? Does the website appear to update automatically? If it does, that may mean that no editor is actually looking at it. And based on your topic, is it current enough? For most of your topics, anything in the last 10 to 20 years is going to be good, but some topics may go back even further, such as if you're writing about gun control. That's going to go back several decades. Same thing with abortion. Same thing with other rights issues. Is the source reliable? What kind of information is included in the website? Based on your other research, is it accurate and is it complete? Is the content primarily fact or is it opinion? Is the information balanced or is it biased? Does the author provide references for quotations and data? And if there are links, do they work? Be careful of this because even reliable news sources may not always update the links in older stories, so you may get a dead link or two. That doesn't invalidate the reporting in the story. But what you can do is use the Wayback Machine, which is another internet website, and go back to that source on the Wayback Machine to see if there is a cached version of it on the internet where you can actually see the site as it existed on that date. The A stands for authority. In other words, are they credible? Can you determine who the author or creator is? Is there some way to contact them? What are their credentials? What's their education? What's their political affiliation or their affiliation with a group? What's their experience, and so on? Is there evidence that they are experts on the subject? This is something to be very careful about because someone may seem to be an expert on a subject and actually be a complete nut. I'm thinking specifically about Dinesh D'Souza, who has published several books and seems to be an authority on the subject, but is also not very credible. He happened to be in jail for some period of time and still sends out crackpot theories on Twitter. Who is the publisher or the sponsor of the site? And is this publisher or sponsor reputable? And finally, the P in CRAP stands for purpose or point of view. What's the intention of the website? Is it to persuade you, to sell you something, or something else? What's the domain name? If it's edu, it's a university. In most cases, that's going to be fine. Maybe not so much with Liberty University, but I think they have a .com designation instead. .org means that it's a nonprofit organization, but not always. Some nonprofits have a very biased view, others don't. You have to be careful. .com means that it's business, but beware, almost all news sites are .coms because they are also trying to make money as a news business. That doesn't necessarily invalidate their point of view. How might that domain influence their purpose or their point of view? Are there ads on the website? How do they relate to the topic being covered? For example, is there an ad for ammunition next to an article about firearms legislation? That is probably a sign that it is an extreme right biased website about and against gun control. Is the author presenting fact or opinion? Who might benefit from a reader believing the site? This is particularly good for those conspiracy theory sites, especially InfoWars. They say that the world is going to end, not necessarily by pandemic, because they've gotten this sort of thing wrong before. And because of that, they sell on their website survivalist tools. And because of this, on their website, they sell survival tools. That's how they make a lot of their money, by convincing you that the world is about to end and you should buy their products. Based on the writing style, who's the intended audience? Who's this intended for? Is it intended for all readers, or is it just conservative readers or liberal readers? This is what's coming up this week. Now, if you're watching this, then you're already seeing the lecture on evaluating sources, and all you need to do is comment below and let me know that you did indeed see it. You should also do the reading on Writing Commons about the thesis statement, just to remind yourself. The evaluation exercise readings are going to be under web links, and that evaluating sources exercise is going to be explained in full in DB number 8. What you're going to do is you're going to read several different sources and using what you've learned in this presentation and using the crap test, determine whether or not you think they are reliable or not, and talk about that in your discussion board post. You're also going to be given a choice of 4 or 5 different topics that we can discuss the following week. And what I absolutely need you to do this week, and by the way, that week ends on 4/12, not 4/10. I'll make sure this is fixed when I get out of this lecture. What I need you to do is choose your top 2 of those topics so I know what you'd like to discuss on the following week, because when we get to paper number 3, I'm going to choose whatever topic is the winner for this set of readings. This set of readings is already chosen. In fact, I may end up using both student choices if it turns out that there are enough votes on it, but you need to do that in DB number 8. And most importantly, paper number 2 is due by Sunday night, 11:59 p.m. this week. So please make sure that if you have any issues, especially if you haven't received a peer evaluation, which is looking increasingly likely, please contact me and let me know. You also should contact the Writing Center because they are giving online tutoring sessions during the course of the pandemic. And there's also other sources that you can go to for that sort of tutoring. Thank you very much for your attention. Make sure that if you have any questions or concerns that you email me, text me. We can set up a Zoom meeting if you want to discuss things face-to-face. Otherwise, good luck, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.